I'm Eric Wolf, and my experience in business peer groups has changed my life, especially my membership in Vistage, one of the world's largest CEO advisory groups. I'm an entrepreneur, a business owner, and a Vistage speaker on the power of marketing. This podcast is dedicated to the people who make those experiences possible, the peer group chairs. Every episode, I interview a Vistage chair who has dedicated their time to helping entrepreneurs like me succeed. My guest today is RJ Kolton, who is joining us from Northern Virginia. And RJ is a Vistage chair with a CE group. And I'm fortunate in that in talking to all these Vistage chairs that I run across a number of really unique groups. This is one that I haven't seen before. You are running a CE group that includes not just, a handful, but 15 government contractors. That is just enormous.
Well, that's an accurate statement.
I imagine that your group discussions end up being like a lot different than in, the typical CE group. I mean, probably there's like an overlap of the same, but then there's this whole other world that you've got 15 folks that are a part of, and you've got, basically 3/4 of the group it's a large CE group, and 3/4 of your group is all sort of representing the same industry. I imagine that creates like a really unique, atmosphere and energy and discussions.
Yeah, I mean, when I formed the group back in 2022, and I finished up at Vistage Academy and set out to form my group, which I did create and got it launched in February of 2023. My focus was, very early on was ask the question, what kind of group did I want, and what can I bring to that group? And I had spent 24 years in the corporate suite, and I was an entrepreneur in mainly government contracting. I did a little bit of commercial work. Every company I was with, we did primarily was associated with government contracting. The other thing to consider, though, is the demographics of the DMV, the Virginia, Maryland, D.C. area, heavily influenced by government contracting. Even if you're not a government contracting company per se, so many of your clients or so many of the business activities you would engage in are going to be touched by that ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely.
So when I formed a group, I was looking for knowledge-based industries. It was a reflection of me. I'm very comfortable with advanced technology, information management, the more advanced types of products and offerings that companies provided. Now, not every member is GovCon, but they're touched by it. So I have a nonprofit, for example, that's the National Council for Mental Health Wellbeing. That CEO is got 3,000 members in his organization, and yet his organization is providing mental health products or solutions throughout the United States and involved with government agencies. So theoretically, or even though he's not necessarily a direct government contractor, he's part of that government ecosystem. As far as the comfort level, it was very early on as I interviewed each of the members. What were they comfortable with? They would all know who was coming on board, the first group settling in. And the word GovCon or government contractor, it's not probably helpful in the sense that, yeah, they're involved in government contracting, but I've got one organization that's involved with let's say the intelligence community, another one that's involved with the IRS. They don't necessarily overlap. And our protocols in our group were, we did allow folks to collaborate if it made sense, but everyone had to be very declarative that they felt safe, that they were going to be open and transparent in the meetings. And if it was a problem, I need to know about it. And if it really became a problem, then we would adjust. So, if you think about it, I have 53% of my folks have been with me over 2.5 years. Another quarter have been with me for between 1.5 and 2 years, and in a very small number have been with me less than a year. So it worked, and everybody's very comfortable and they're very committed to one another. So in essence, it worked very well.
That's amazing. And I imagine that, and I know that that's a very And even though obviously the government is incredibly large and broad and diverse in terms of the types of things that they purchase and things like that, and obviously, selling a product or service that is intended for the intelligence community is probably different than selling something to the IRS. But there's also but there's also like a sort of an insular thing about working with the government. It is its own thing. It has its own rules. It has its own. There's obviously a lot that is similar to working in commercial, but there's also a lot that isn't. I would guess that your members get a lot out of that.
Yeah, that's a very insightful observation. That's absolutely true. GovCon business models are different than commercial business models. The business cycle is quite a bit different.
Yeah.
The challenge for a government contracting associated company is you can spend a lot of money and time trying to win a contract that may or may not get awarded.
Right.
But once you get awarded, it's got a longer period of performance than the average commercial contract. So the bottom line is you have much more assurances of your backlog and long-term financial activity. So it's excellent for planning purposes. Commercial work, obviously shorter cycles, and you have an opportunity to, win work. You have to really scale your company to win work quickly and do it quickly. So it is a different business model. The challenges are different. Once again, as a chair, we all bring our own strengths. I mean, having spent 24 years immersed in growing companies in that environment, mastering the processes, the procedures, the practices, the regulations, the rules, I can help my members understand what best ways to do things. Most important, when we get in the peer group activity at a board meeting, they can share, they can discuss. And then clearly the challenges of scaling your company, who you hire, how you manage your employees, how do you deal with good things and bad things in your company. They all share very similar challenges, and there are different ways to resolve these things. So that really comes up in our one-to-ones. It comes up in our board meetings, and it's very enriching.
And I really want to get to talking about you and your history, which is super interesting. But one last question about the group and the uniqueness of the group. This is a heck of a year to be chairing a Vistage group that includes a whole lot of folks that, whether directly or secondarily, are beholden to the government for their money. Things have been, shall we say, chaotic. How has that atmosphere rolled into your meetings?
Great question. Beginning with the election of President Trump and then the introduction of his cabinet members and obviously the Doge activities that were introduced, it immediately became an area of focus for us. Every one of our meetings, every one of our one-to-ones, and every one of our board meetings since then, we spent some amount of time on reviewing what's the status of each of the companies relative to some of these changes. What are they doing about it? What are the no kidding things they need to change? Where do they need to pivot? It was all done in a very positive way. I think that, once again, I think the demographic of the folks that join our Vistage group probably reflects this positive mindset. We don't sit around and complain about the things we cannot change. It's very stoic, if you will. We focus on the things we can affect. And the results have been relatively positive. I've only had a few members that have really had to make some significant changes. Majority of the folks are stable. Anything can happen tomorrow morning, and the idea is stay on top of it. But the key thing is, what was in the strategic plan? Every one of my members working with me have developed 3-year plans at a minimum. So what's in the plan that's still valid? What isn't valid? What do you do about it? And there's a financial component, there's the qualitative and the quantitative elements of this whole discussion, but it is a huge element of our discussions without losing sight of long-term issues and all the other issues relative to the company. How do you take care of your people? How do you communicate changes to the people? So reassure folks as much as you can about their jobs and about the environment, and keep a positive mental attitude across your corporate environment, because a lot of the folks, well, all the folks are recognizing there's a tremendous negative impact, let's say, on government workers themselves, and they have relationships with them. So they're not immune to that. They know that a lot of government workers have suffered under the changes. This is not a criticism of the administration, it's a reality, and they're sensitive to that, empathetic to it. At the same time, employees have that same kind of relationship or observing. So CEOs and their senior team, leadership team, have to manage and navigate this stuff in a positive way so that the business goes forward, people are empathetic and properly behave and maintain high morale.
Yeah, I've got a number of folks who work, within my Vistage community, within my client base that work in and around the government. The thing that they have, keep expressing is it's like, hey, we're gonna figure this out. Like, hey, we're Vistage members, like you said, we're problem solvers. But I think that the pill that's been hardest to swallow for a lot of folks is just this air of uncertainty, of like sort of anything can happen, and we just don't know. It's a very challenging environment to be living in for a lot of folks. I imagine.
Right. Yeah. And I do think this is probably where CEOs really are tested, and the ability to be gritty. It's not, we could talk philosophically about things when things are going well. The same thing occurs in the military. It's easy to talk about things when things are going well and handle things when they're going well. It's real, but leaders are paid to handle things when they don't go well. And now is the time to be gritty and resilient and be resourceful and innovative, and focus on the things that are really, really important. Focus on the things you can impact on. Don't get waysided. Don't get diverted based on emotional things and things you cannot change. And once again, that sort of a stoic philosophy, it's very valid here, because otherwise you can find yourself getting distracted in a very bad way and lose your positive mindset and get you in trouble.
And you've given me a good segue. There are a lot of Vistage chairs I found. It is very, very common that you meet a Vistage chair and find out that he or she has served in the military. You also have served, but more than that, you had a long and rich military career. You went to West Point. You were in the military for a total of 26 years, 22 as an infantry officer, combat veteran. How has, and then you had another career after that, so we're on career number 3 for you. But I imagine that it was career number 1 that really has informed who you are as a person and how you present yourself as a leader, and when you walk into that room with your chief executives. I would love to hear about what that long and deep military experience brought to you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very fortunate and privileged to have had the opportunity, 1, to go to West Point, and 2, then to serve a career in the military as an infantry officer and as a military strategist. A lot of Americans who may never have served may really not understand what we really learn in that environment. One is just being around some just great people, and they're all young. I mean, the older you get and you look at them, and my family is very much a military family, so I'm exposed to active serving members. They're all so young, and it's important to remember we're all young when we do this career, and we're really given a lot of responsibilities. And so in several respects. One is you learn a lot of things starting at West Point. How do you deal with people in a variety of different situations? How do you deal with pressure? How do you deal with stress? How do you motivate folks? How do you coach them? How do you work with a blue collar workforce? How do you work with a white collar workforce? The jobs I had, as an infantry officer, in sort of planning and training and leading troops, and I served 2 tours in the 82nd Airborne Division. So I was with paratroopers, which were a different breed entirely. Wow. I ran refugee operations in Iraq for our division during Desert Storm and worked with some, not only just active duty people, but reservists, terrific reserve soldiers, and dealing with a tough situation of refugee operations. So you learn a lot of skills that are in these complex environments. But then I also had the privilege of doing some other things, like I taught at West. I went back to grad school and I taught history at West Point. So I was an academic. So I dealt with, I'm building my own curriculum and teaching and coaching and mentoring students, cadets, helping them get ready to be officers. And then as a result of being schooled as a strategist and selected for that field as well, I had a great opportunity to serve at the 4-star level at the most senior levels as a strategist. So, involved with international negotiations, involved with dealing with very complex, sensitive issues at that level, and pulling together material for for the 4-star general. So when I was, one of my jobs in those things was speech writing, which if anybody's ever done it, it's not, you're not just writing speeches, you're pulling together, collating complex material in a manner that senior general and his staff can use it in a coherent manner. And then finally, I ended my career in the White House Drug Office, working for the Drug Czar as one of the strategists. And there were just a couple of us. And once again, get exposed at the national level, which was fun for me because as an historian teaching history, here I was working in the White House, having a chance to get exposed to the West Wing, get exposed to the way the federal government operates at the most senior levels. And that was the Clinton administration when I was there. So it was,
I was doing the math in my head, and I was trying to figure out if it was Bush or Clinton that you were under.
President Clinton's administration, and I made some terrific friends as a detailee, military detailee, if you will, apolitical. I made friends on both sides. If you want to talk about Republican, Democrat, I had some really good friends who were Democrats, great people. So when you take all those activities, before I even went into the business world, when I made the decision to go ahead and retire and begin that second career, if you take all the things I just mentioned, it makes you who you are. I mean, you're showing up who you are, and you've grown up in that environment. You've learned from your mistakes. You built on the mentoring and coaching you received and the great role models you had. And if you got exposed to bad leadership during that period, well, you learned from that too. And so you're entering the business world, and I was 44 when I did, with quite a bit of experience. And I'll stop there a minute and see if you have any questions.
Yeah, no, I've got. I trust me, I got questions. And first of all, this is going back a few minutes. I think that there's a thing that happens with, you mentioned young people in the military, and you mentioned how they step in and they're given a lot of responsibilities, is how you put it. I mean, I think that there's sort of putting it lightly, right? I mean, in a lot of these, basically kids are coming up and they're getting jobs that can sometimes have life and death implications, and responsibility is only the start of it. And I imagine that carrying that sort of weight in your first job after college, I imagine that does something to you, and that conditions you in a way to approach the world in a certain respect. I don't know.
Once again, you made a really insightful observation, and I mean this with all my sincerity. When we go to West Point for 4 years, which sets the standards for the officer corps, for the great ROTC officers and OCS officers, but the standards are really created at West Point, have been since 1802. we live by the code, duty, honor, country, and it really is ingrained in us. And it isn't corny, and it's truly believed. You talk to anybody who's a grad, and there may be an oddball out there, but all of us who graduated from there come in with a deep commitment to the country, to the Constitution, to the American people, to accomplishing the mission, take care of our soldiers, and maintain the highest levels of integrity. And it can get challenged. That old story about doing the harder right versus the easier wrong. I mean, when you're thrust into complex situations as in combat, the ability to be resourceful and do things properly you get tested. So, obviously what all of that does is shapes who you are as a human being and how you deal with folks and recognizing the psychology of people. I mean, we all take some basic psychology courses, right? But the kind of things we dealt with in the military when you're dealing with young people as their commander, these are great kids. They come from all walks of life. Some come from very rural areas, some come from the inner city, some come from the Ivy League environment, but they're mixed together, and they're 18 to 26 years old. The sergeants, the old men are the sergeants, and they're not even 30 yet. And they have their issues, challenges, and helping them become the best versions of themselves, which we do, and we do a terrific job of. These young soldiers, when they finally leave the service, many of them do, and go off and to become just American citizens, veterans, they are better than they were when they started, and they made a big influence. And it's just a great thing to watch and see that kind of growth. And then occasionally you have a chance to run into these folks years later, and it's a great feeling. So, we've had a tough, since I retired, obviously, from 2001 up until even now, we've had great soldiers, service people, serving in combat continuously. And, there have been some folks that have been challenged, but it's really important to keep in mind that we don't over-exaggerate those challenges. And these are terrific people that when they come home and they want to serve now in their next career, they bring a wealth of expertise, experience, and knowledge that should not be underestimated. And they've been thrust in the most chaotic, difficult situations, and they've done well. I had the opportunity in 2011. I was doing a study for the Army. I was chief growth officer of a company, but we won a contract to do a study in Afghanistan for the Army, and the CEO, who was my West Point classmate, asked if I would lead it, and I said, sure. At the time, my son was commanding a company in Afghanistan. But as I moved around Afghanistan doing this study with my scientists that I had to bring in, the particular study we were doing, I had a chance to be around all these young troops and see them in combat with their sergeants, with their officers. And this was 2011 in some tough locations in Afghanistan. They were terrific. It brings tears to your eyes. These were just committed, disciplined soldiers, and the service people, the other services that were present, that we should all be proud of that. And so, and it's a little bit long-winded, but the bottom line was, it was just a great opportunity to validate all my beliefs about how great we are as a nation, that we can generate and do these kind of things. We have the greatest military in the world, and which is important because we're supposed to be the beacon of liberty for the world, and we still are.
Real quickly before I change topics on you one last time. So you have this career and you end up in the White House working under the Drug Czar in the Clinton administration. I mean, that's like up there, right? Like, I mean, how do you then go about your business afterwards? You're in the White House, and then you're at Arby's having a roast beef sandwich or something. I imagine it's like, does that give you, what kind of emotional high does that give you to have, done that sort of work in the, out of the White House?
Well, in my case, humility Really, it was really important. I had been serving at the senior level then from, 93 on, at the 4-star level and everything else. So one of the things is you really walk away realizing all these senior people who are in the news are human beings, and they got strengths and they got shortcomings. And the vast majority of our senior people, may they be in uniform or in civilian suits, they really are good people. Despite all of the bad news stuff out there that occurs, the vast, vast majority of our public servants are really great people. You may not agree with them politically and everything, but they're committed to doing good things. They got their strengths, they got their shortcomings. So one is you walk away with humility. So when I decided to go in the business world, I had all this background and all that, but I started out in a company learning the ropes. It just so happened the company I went to, the first one was MPRI, which was a military-focused training company run by the former Chief Staff of the Army. They all knew me from reputation and because I'd run into them. So I ended up with the great fortune of being with the first company for 11 years. They were all former military folks, many of them I served with before. I got promoted up through merit. I was willing to do hard work. I was willing to really learn business, and all the things I did in the past were to give me the capacity to learn more. I didn't expect to get special attention, because most of us in this kind of work have done great things, but it's what you're going to do tomorrow morning that really matters. And I guess I would say that's an important point I just made. When I work with my CEOs, we say, what kind of company, how do you build a company and how do you sustain a company? I truly believe that one of the best comparisons of any of us in an organization is a baseball team. And I really believe that because what I mean by that is we show up for spring practice and we bring our game face. We prepare to give 100% to our team, whatever team we're on, choose a company. All the stuff we did the previous year is fantastic. It shows that we have the capacity to do great things, but you have got to perform the next year. Go for the series, win the pennant. And if you're not performing to standard and you get told, hey, you need to improve here, that isn't an insult or anything. It's the leadership, the team expects you to carry your weight. And so those folks who fail to keep growing and fail to perform, maybe they get invited to move to another team. But every organization we're part of, we all have to remember as leaders, as performers, you've got to continually improve. You've got to continually bring your game face. And just because you achieved things last year doesn't necessarily mean you're going to achieve them this year. And so you can't rest on your laurels.
Number one, that was terribly insightful. And I just have to say, your group is tremendously lucky to have you. Last question. I want to be respectful of your time. So after this long, then second career where you were working in the private sector, what made you decide that the next chapter for you was to be a Vistage chair? What was the thing that led you there?
Yeah, great question. So in 2022, I'd finished up as chief operating officer of a company, and I was looking at what do I want to do next. And I made a list of all the things in my life that really excited me and what I felt that I really wanted to do, because I wasn't ready to just go retire, if you will. And atop of the list was I really love coaching and mentoring. And I looked at my own career with humility and said, I learned a lot, both good because of achievements and mistakes. And I thought, what I really would like to do, coach CEOs and senior executives. I was aware of Vistage. One of my CEOs, one of the companies I was with this, was a Vistage member. And I had talked to Vistage a few years before, like around 2017. I wasn't ready then. I was doing some important stuff in the corporate world. But in 2022, I happened to link up with the senior VP for the Eastern region. He sent me a note said, would you be interested in being a chair? And I jumped on it. I was getting ready to go. One of my hobbies is ocean sailing and racing, and I was getting ready to do the Newport Bermuda race with a colleague of mine, and which was going to be a few weeks later. And so I was pumped up. I thought, you know what, this is what I want to be doing. So the bottom line is it's this passion for coaching, mentoring, giving back. If I can do it, help other people become best versions of themselves. It's been fulfilling since I've started it. It met my expectations. And so that was really, really important to me at this point in my life, was to give back, to help other people, to be a servant leader, if you will, for others. And I'll keep doing this as long as my health allows it. Fortunately, I'm healthy, as I get older here, but I'm still healthy and I can do it. But that was really important to me, to do have that kind of an opportunity to continue to serve.
Well, that's terrific, and I do believe that your group is super fortunate to have you. You've been a terrific guest. This has been, I have absolutely loved talking to you. This was terrific. If folks have questions about Vistage, questions about you, questions about the GovCon world, questions about how accurate the West Wing TV show was, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, and my email is rj.kolton, KOLTON, at vistagechair.com.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much for being a great guest.
Eric, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Great opportunity to meet you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Chairwaves. You can subscribe to our feed using Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your platform of choice. You can also visit chairwaves.com for more information. Chairwaves is hosted and produced by me, Eric Wolf, and to connect with me, you can visit my website at ewolf.live. That's EWOLF.live. And a disclaimer, while I love Vistage and CEO peer groups, this podcast is not owned by or affiliated with Vistage or any other peer organization. Thanks for listening.